The sun filtered through the lace curtains, painting golden ribbons on the polished oak table as I sank into the high-back chair opposite Brielle and her sister, Tamsin. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sharp tang of lemon zest lingering on the breakfast plates. Brielle's laugh bubbled over the crackle of eggs sizzling in butter, a sound so light it could have belonged to someone at a resort spa rather than the place I once called home. Tamsin tumbled into that laugh, her perfect teeth flashing as she raised a silver fork in a mock salute. "Isn't it great, Brie?" she said, voice coated in excitement. "Dad's estate is finally ours." I watched their shoulders rise and fall in unison, spoiled heiresses certain of their victory. Their father's sprawling Georgian mansion, the vineyard rolling down the hill, the wine label prized by collectors, all part of the Carradine legacy, or so they believed. Brielle's coffee cup hovered in the air before she took a triumphant sip, the rich bitterness matching the smug curve of her lips. I held my own mug, warm and grounding against the tremor I felt coil in my chest. I didn't steel myself. I was calm. I didn't scowl. I simply let her words settle into the room like an unwelcome fog. "Sorry, man," Brielle said, tapping her manicured fingers on the rim of her cup. The glassware chimed softly. "But the estate is ours now." They high-fived, the sound brittle, like fine china tapping together. Their eyes glittered with entitlement. I set my cup down, the saucer rattling against the table. I reached into my briefcase, the leather smooth under my fingers, and withdrew a thick manila folder. Its edges were crisp. The paper inside bore the faint watermark of every legal seal any high-power attorney could recognize. I placed it deliberately in front of me. The movement was measured, calm, impossible to interrupt. Brielle's smile faltered. Tamsin's expression faltered. Their laughter died the instant my hand touched that folder. It sat between us like a silent judge. I glanced at them both, measuring the shift in the air. "Actually," I said, voice as steady as the oak beneath our elbows, "your father sold everything to me years ago." The truth hit harder than I expected. Tamsin's fork clattered against her plate as she straightened in shock. Brielle's mouth parted and closed again, empty words caught on her tongue. Their eyes flicked from me to the folder, to each other, as if seeking an ally in the other's confusion. Under the breakfast chandelier, their perfect images cracked. I opened the folder, revealing pages upon pages of executed contracts, notarized signatures, and a timeline of payments, each one marked accepted in clear script. The documents traced back 5 years, when Edward Carradine first hinted at retirement and began seeking someone to oversee the day-to-day management of the estate. He trusted me then in ways he never trusted his own daughters. Surprise sharpened Brielle's cheekbones. I pictured the innumerable times she'd posted glossy stories of photo shoots in the mansion's sunroom, captioned "Future Heiress," ignorant that every square inch, every beam, every vine was already mine. Tamsin's perfectly coiled hair trembled as she swallowed. I leaned forward, resting my fingers lightly on the open folder. "I started as an accountant," I explained. "You two were too busy jetting off to influencers' conventions, too wrapped up in your own worlds to notice the books." Edward quietly slipped the shares into a blind trust. My eyes met Brielle's. He sold the estate to the trust. He sold the trust to me. Silence filled the room, thick and oppressive. The waiter hovered by the door, uncertain whether to refill coffee or slip away. Tamsin swallowed again, eyes darting to her sister as if for reassurance. But we all knew there was none. Their father's plan had been subtle. Integrate me into the family circle, let me earn their trust, then gradually reveal how far I'd gone to protect the legacy he loved more than anyone, or anything. For every weekend brunch, every casual handshake in his study, I'd been gathering signatures, securing financing, obtaining valuations, ensuring that when Edward was ready, I was ready too. And he always said he would be ready first. "Your father built this empire," I said softly, "but he never trusted you to preserve it. He trusted me." I closed the folder with a soft clap. That's why he sold it quietly, so no one could contest it until the day he chose. Brielle's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. The liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim but stayed contained, a metaphor for her composure. Fragile but unbroken, for now. Tamsin pressed her palms to the table, white knuckles gripping the edge. Neither sister spoke. The look on their faces was one of disbelief laced with betrayal. I slid the folder back into my briefcase and zipped it closed. Their plans, their party invitations, their high-definition Instagram reels. All of it lay in my hands now. I gathered my coat and rose, the leather brushing against the back of my chair. "Enjoy your morning," I said, voice courteous but final. "I'll see you both at the family meeting this afternoon." They watched me go, stunned, as I walked out of the breakfast nook and into the corridor lined with family portraits predating my involvement, yet soon to hang in rooms I controlled. The security cameras, installed under my recommendation, blinked quietly overhead, capturing every moment of this morning's revelation. Their laughter over eggs and coffee was already preserved for posterity. Stepping outside, I inhaled the crisp air, felt the weight of what I'd accomplished settle around me like a well-tailored coat. The sun still rose, the birds still sang, yet everything had changed. Because sometimes, the quiet man at the table is the one writing the rules. And this morning, I just reminded two heiresses exactly who owned the kingdom. I believed marrying into the Carradine family meant blending into privilege, not maneuvering through a maze of secrets. Brielle's laughter echoed through manicured halls while Tamsin surveyed guests as if auditioning them. They saw me as the silent accountant, never realizing I was the one they forgot was watching. My day began long before sunrise. By the time they surfaced for brunch, I'd already combed through invoices and site reports. When Edward first invited me into his private study, I expected routine ledger reviews. Instead, I discovered funds earmarked for repairs bleeding into empty accounts. Broken heating in the stables lingered unrepaired, the antique roof tiles cracked beyond safety, and none of it appeared on their social media highlights. I traced every missing line item back to weekend splurges and vanity projects, each excess charge a testament to their neglect. Each document unraveled another thread of mismanagement buried beneath the glamorous facade. Over the following months, I discreetly proposed minor improvements, an upgraded irrigation pump here, streamlined payroll there. To Brielle and Tamsin it seemed helpful but forgettable. They nodded distractedly, I was already scanning the room for cameras or cocktails. Yet each suggestion secretly strengthened my grasp. When Tamsin griped that wine labels looked dull and uninspired, I offered a redesign consistent with collector tastes, Art Deco fonts, subtle foil accents. The sisters never paused to ask who bore the cost. Late evenings found me in the vineyards, checking soil samples and consulting with viticulturists. I earned the crew's respect by showing up in boots caked with earth, not silk loafers. I learned to distinguish between gravelly loam and clay, to anticipate frost pockets by reading the wind, to order frost blankets in time to save delicate shoots. They spoke freely about budget shortfalls and deferred maintenance, unloading frustrations that would have gone unheeded by the sisters. I listened, then quietly authorized shipments of fertilizer and barrels. By the time the harvest rolled around, production numbers soared. The sisters took the credit, oblivious to the man balancing spreadsheets beneath the polished veneer. Meanwhile, Brielle hosted influencer brunches in the sunroom, toasting hashtags with rose-tinted glasses, capturing every moment for her feed. Tamsin staged book launches on the lawn, champagne flutes catching sunset glimmers as guests leaned in to share gossip. They celebrated their legacy while ignorance drained its lifeblood. They never once asked why shipments arrived early, why staff morale improved, or how yields outperformed projections. Their focus was the perfect Instagram shot. Mine was ensuring operational excellence. Meal after meal, I observed their routines. At Sunday buffet tables, they swapped designer handbags like trading cards, commenting on new color schemes or pattern releases. Their conversations never strayed to soil pH levels or budget allocations, never wondered what inspections I scheduled or audits I passed behind closed doors. Their indifference became my greatest ally, granting me access to every corner of the estate, from the cellars to the sheep pasture behind the service barn. The real masterstroke took form on autumn afternoons in Edward's office. He'd sit behind his mahogany desk, rain tapping softly on stained glass windows. He wore glasses perched on his nose, a look of tempered weariness in his eyes. I presented a folder meticulously organized, secret agreements outlining a silent sale of the estate into a blind trust one controlled, accompanied by notarized letters and verified bank transfers. He studied the papers, nodded slowly, then smiled with relief. "They'll never see this coming," he said. Then, with a signature, he placed the family's future squarely in my hands. 5 years passed as I executed each clause, season by season. I recommended strategic tax approaches that maximized revenue, negotiated vineyard expansions, and secured partnerships with respected distributors. Every notary stamp, Every escrow deposit built toward that final trigger, transfer of all holdings upon his death or resignation. The sisters continued their parties, believing ownership secured by bloodline. All the while, I held the deed in the knowledge to activate it. This morning I stand in the great courtyard, sunlight warming the stone beneath my feet. I recall the morning when Brielle first boasted about owning the estate, the same morning I revealed the truth at breakfast. The image stung then, but it feels poetic now. The crew greets me with nods born of loyalty rather than obligation. I feel the weight of responsibility as a mantle rather than a burden. The vines respond to care, the wine press hums with purpose, and the property breathes under my stewardship. In every ledger line and each careful decision, I found not profit but purpose. Now I carry Edward's legacy forward. They will realize late that ambition without stewardship is a hollow inheritance. The moment I stepped into the library, the scent of aged leather and polished wood wrapped around me like a shroud. Afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the Persian rug beneath my feet. Brielle and Tamsin fluttered around each other near the hearth, their voices a low hum of pretense as they posed for impromptu photos that didn't need to exist. Their laughter felt brittle, an echo of entitlement in a room built on legacy. I took a measured breath and closed the French doors behind me, sealing us in. They paused, sensing the shift, as I approached the grandfather clock in the corner. Its pendulum swung steadily, a silent witness to generations of Carradine pride. I set a small remote on the ornate side table and clicked it. A hidden panel slid open in the wall behind the hearth, revealing shelves lined with files, organized by date and stamped with confidential seals. Brielle's eyes widened, mascara shimmering with surprise. Tamsin's mouth dropped open, as if words had fled her tongue. "My father and I drafted this," I said, gesturing toward the documents. "It's the secret clause." Their expressions shifted from curiosity to confusion to dawning dread. I retrieved the top folder, emblazoned with the estate's crest. Inside lay the Trust Agreement 7B, a document they had never skimmed, let alone parsed. I flipped it open to the final provision, the clause that would nullify any claim they imagined they held. Upon his passing, all assets transferred to the designated trustee, unless the heirs demonstrate sustained responsibility for no fewer than 24 consecutive months. Silence thrummed between us. Tamsin swallowed, stepping forward. Sustained responsibility? What does that even mean? Her voice trembled. Brielle's phone dropped from manicured fingers and clattered on the rug. I closed the folder gently, leaning against the carved oak desk. It spelled out right here: management of daily operations, oversight of finances, and direct involvement in preservation and growth. It requires active stewardship, documented and corroborated by independent auditors. I paused, watching their pale faces. Spoiler alert, you don't qualify. Tamsin's eyes flicked to the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam, as if trying to will them to offer some escape. She opened her mouth and closed it again, as though tasting bitterness. Brielle's cheeks flushed. That's ridiculous, she said, voice quavering. We grew up here. We know every corner of this house. She gestured at the grand ceiling, the oil portraits, the library's endless volumes. We're practically born into this place. I stepped forward, closing the distance. Knowing aesthetics doesn't equal knowing administration. You two ran off to fashion launches, influencer retreats, and champagne brunches. You never asked about operational budgets, never questioned why the employee turnover dropped after I started, never noticed the upgrades to security or the enhancements to the irrigation system. My words gathered weight as each example unfurled. The automated temperature controls I installed in the wine cellar, the vending of harvest schedules online, the renegotiated lease agreements for the guest cottages. Every gesture logged, every invoice paid, every repair scheduled. All done without a thank you or a second thought. Their shoulders sank, the performance of innocence crumpling under the quiet force of truth. Brielle's voice cracked. So you set this up with him? Kept us in the dark for years. The tremor in her tone hinted at betrayal more than anger. I folded my arms. He needed someone who would act rather than pose. Someone who saw the estate as a living entity rather than a backdrop. A faint smile ghosted across my lips. We created the clause together. He wanted a safeguard, and I wanted the responsibility. Tamsin's head dropped, hair brushing her collarbone. But we're his daughters. She sounded small, diminished. Brielle glanced at her sister, as if seeking solidarity, but neither found comfort. Blood counts for nothing? Brielle whispered. The question hung fragile as crystal. I respect his choices, I replied softly. He loved you both, but he didn't trust you. Trust isn't automatic. I closed the folder and returned it to its hidden shelf, then replaced the panel. The library's familiar calm settled back around us. I'm not here to punish you, I continued, but the clause exists. It's real. It's binding. I gestured to the grand window. You can try to prove yourselves, but you'll have to start from the ground up. Brielle straightened, chin lifting. Anger flared behind her eyes. You can't do this, she said, voice rising. We'll contest it. We'll sue. Tamsin echoed her sister's defiance, but I remained composed. Go ahead, I said. You'll forfeit any remaining claims the moment you dispute the trust. That's part of the agreement. Their faces paled. They realized there was no benefit in fighting. The penalty was too great. In the hush that followed, I turned toward the mahogany foyer beyond the library doors. Light danced on the bronze door handles, whispering reminders of welcome and exclusion. I retrieved my coat from a nearby stand and slipped it on. Before I left, I looked back at the sisters, so regal in demeanor, yet unmoored by a clause neither anticipated. Take your time, I said, voice gentle. Learn if you must. The opportunity's on the table for the next 24 months. After that, it's too late. As I walked away, their stunned silence trailed me, weaving through the corridors like a lament. The clause would remain their secret burden now, a silent sentinel guarding their dreams of entitlement. And I would watch quietly, meticulously, ensuring that every day they failed to prove themselves, they edged closer to complete forfeiture. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't force, it's the fine print hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when everyone forgets to look. I arrived in the drawing room just as the late afternoon light softened through the tall mullioned windows, dust motes dancing like tiny specters in the waning sun. The air was thick with anticipation and lingering cold from the shutters left ajar. Tamsin stood near the marble hearth draped in black, her posture rigid as though rehearsing for a funeral scene. Brielle lounged on an embroidered settee in white silk, her gaze flitting between the ornate clock and the door, as though timing the moment of her victory. I paused at the threshold, buttoning my navy suit jacket with deliberate calm. The hush that fell over the assembled guests greeted me like an old friend. Helena Reyes stood at the head of the room, a mahogany lectern in front of her and a leather-bound portfolio at her side. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and her spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose like an emblem of authority. She cleared her throat, and the soft echo of her voice drew every eye. Thank you all for gathering on this solemn occasion, she began, her tone measured. We are here to honor the last wishes of Mr. Edward Carradine and to execute the provisions laid out in his final testament. A murmur rippled through the family and close acquaintances clustered in aged high-backed chairs. The heavy drapes and carved wooden paneling lent the room an almost ecclesiastical gravity, as though leaving without his blessing would be akin to sacrilege. I stepped forward, placing my case file, already familiar to me, in plain view on a side table. The leather cover bore the estate's embossed seal, the very seal the Carradines had believed under their exclusive control. Helena opened the portfolio and extracted the first page, spreading crisp sheets across the lectern. Her slender fingers paused over the text, and she looked up at the room. I shall begin with Article 1. Her voice wove through bequests of personal effects, grandfather clocks to nieces, paintings to distant cousins, charitable donations to local hospitals. The sisters exchanged knowing glances, their relief palpable. This was their moment, until it wasn't. With deliberate precision, Helena turned the page. Article 14, Section B. Under Trust Agreement 7B, all real property, corporate shares, and subsidiary holdings of the Carradine estate shall transfer in entirety to the designated trustee upon Mr. Carradine's passing. She let the words hang, then lifted her gaze. It is my duty to inform you that the designated trustee is not one of the blood heirs, but Mr. Sebastian Clark. A spectator's gasp, delicate as the breaking of china, rose from the cluster of onlookers. Brielle's eyes narrowed. Tamsin's lips parted in disbelief. The silence pressed on, punctuated by the soft creak of an antique chair as I straightened my tie and stepped closer. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes settling on me, their heat pricking my skin. Helena dipped her finger to a highlighted passage. The trust instrument, executed and filed under confidential seal 5 years ago, assigned Mr. Clark as the sole trustee, with full authority over all estate assets. In that instant, the room seemed to tilt. Tamsin's black gown blended with the shadows near the hearth. Brielle's pearls gleamed defiantly against the white of her dress. The guests shifted on their seats, uneasy now that the comfortable narrative of hereditary entitlement had fractured. I inhaled, tasting the faint edge of cold tea and polished wood. My heartbeat was steady, anchored by the knowledge that I held every signature, every notarized transfer. Helena turned back to the next sheet. Mr. Carradine further stipulated that any attempt by an heir to contest this trust shall trigger Section C, voiding their claim to all assets, including stipends and honorary titles. She paused, glancing up at Brielle and Tamsin. In choosing this measure, Mr. Carradine sought to ensure responsible stewardship of the estate through proven dedication and integrity. Brielle rose to her feet, her white dress rustling. "This must be a mistake," she said, voice pitched too high. "Father would never," her protest dissolved beneath the steadiness of Helena's gaze. Tamsin rose behind her sister, arms crossed. "Sebastian, you can't just waltz in here and steal what's ours," she spat, pointing a ring-clad finger at me. Her gesture trembled with indignation. I watched them for a moment, gauging the shift in their composure. Then I spoke, my voice calm enough to contrast with their frantic energy. "There's no mistake." I moved to stand beside Helena, feeling the polished parquet floor steady beneath my shoes. "These documents are genuine. Every transfer approved. Every clause signed. Your father entrusted me because he needed someone who would treat this legacy with respect, not as a backdrop." I paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle. Tamsin's mouth opened and closed in rapid succession, her bravado crumbling. Brielle's shoulders slumped, as though deflating under a sudden gust. The assembled guests leaned forward, curiosity tempered by unease. I glanced at Helena, whose expression conveyed nothing but professional resolve. Together, we formed the axis upon which this moment pivoted. Helena closed the portfolio with a soft snap. "Mr. Clark will assume full administrative duties immediately," she announced. "Any further communications or directives regarding the estate should be directed to him." She lifted her eyes to me and nodded slightly. I inclined my head in acknowledgement, understanding that what came next would set the tone for every interaction to follow. I turned back to the sisters, extending a hand, not in reconciliation, but in invitation. "I intend to honor your father's wishes and safeguard what he built. If you wish to work alongside me, you may do so under the terms he specified. Otherwise, I will proceed as trustee in sole capacity." They stood, stunned, bereft of retort. Brielle's knuckles whitened around her clutch. Tamsin's lips quivered. Neither sister dared move, bound by the clauses they had never read and the will they had never expected to obey. The room exhaled as I closed the distance to the nearest window, light spilling across polished surfaces. The drawing room held its breath, every echo and shadow preserving this turning point. In that silence, I understood something vital. Power rarely announces itself with fanfare. More often, it waits patiently in the fine print, ready to reshape destinies in the stillest of moments. Every corridor in the Carradine estate hummed with quiet tension as I stepped into the drawing room, the polished hardwood floor reflecting the late afternoon light. The remnants of Edward's will reading still lingered in the air like a solemn echo, and I could almost taste the weight of silence pressing against my lungs. Brielle's face was flushed, her knuckles white around the arms of the gilded chair where she sat slumped, refusal etched in every fiber of her posture. Tamsin stood by the grand piano, her shoulders set as rigid as marble statues, nails tapping an accusatory rhythm against the ebony wood. I barely acknowledged the dozen familiar faces. Friends, distant relatives, advisors clustered near the bay windows, their polite expressions taut with unspoken questions. My hand hovered over the folder at my side, the folder that bore the trust documents Edward and I had hidden from his heirs. I inhaled deeply, drawing in the mingled scents of polished leather, aged mahogany, and the faintest hint of lavender from the bouquets placed there in his memory. "Enough," Brielle snapped, voice cracking like fine crystal under pressure. "We'll have him removed. We'll contest this." Each word was a declaration of war, flung into the room like a gauntlet. Tamsin echoed her sister's fury. "We'll sue." She leaned forward, eyes blazing with indignation and hurt. The two of them rose in unison, a mirrored display of entitlement and outrage. as though the entire room existed only to watch them reclaim what was theirs by birthright. For a moment, I considered stepping back, letting their anger play out among the guests, but I knew better. The truth must arrive untainted by interruption, its impact undiluted. I pressed the remote in my palm, barely feeling its smooth weight, and turned toward Helena Reyes, who stood by the console beneath the portrait of Edward in his prime. Her gray-streaked hair was pinned exactly as it always was, severe, impeccable, unwavering. Her finger hovered over the play icon on the touchscreen. The soft click cut through the sisters' rant like a guillotine's blade. On the screen above us, the security feed flickered alive. The view opened on this very room, captured 2 years ago when I'd recommended a full upgrade of the estate's surveillance system. State-of-the-art cameras with motion detection, high-definition lenses, and built-in audio recording. The irony was almost exquisite. The footage showed Brielle at the breakfast nook, bright morning light dancing on her designer handbag as she toasted champagne glasses with Tamsin. They laughed, light, careless laughter, and rehearsed lines for their social channels. The angle shifted, panning over to the drawing room as they flounced down the corridor toward the meeting that morning, fresh from their celebratory brunch. Then it cut to their confrontation with Helena, their shouts of entitlement caught in crystalline clarity. Brielle's high-pitched demand, "Remove him, how dare he," and Tamsin's guttural promise, "We'll sue every last cent out of this place." Their voices tumbled over each other, raw with betrayal and self-righteous fury. Faces in the room stiffened. I saw gasps of shock from profitable investors, sympathetic frowns from old family friends, and the red glow of embarrassment spreading across Brielle's cheeks. She pressed trembling fingers to her lips, as though to silence the cries that had already been immortalized on camera. Tamsin's posture slumped, her bravado drained by the cold incontrovertibility of evidence. The screen went black with a smooth motion, and Helena lowered her hand, expression as unreadable as marble. "Section 7C, she announced, her voice calm enough to send shivers down every spine. Clearly states, if either daughter contests the validity of the trust agreement, that daughter shall forfeit all rights, claims, and stipends associated with the estate forthwith." She paused, allowing her words to settle like fresh snow on a silent field. I could feel the hush deepen, each breath drawn with careful deliberation. "Your actions today constitute a contest." The only sound after that was the soft ping of new emails arriving on Brielle and Tamsin's phones, the unavoidable proof that the footage had been delivered to their legal counsel and to the archives for judicial record. Brielle's phone vibrated on the table. She stared at it, mouth agape, as if she could unring the bell by denying its existence. Tamsin's gaze dropped to her own screen, wide-eyed, as she read the time-stamped file name, Carradine Trust _challenged MP4. I stepped toward them, mindful of my suit sleeves brushing the backs of antique chairs. My voice was gentle, almost regretful. I never wanted this to become a spectacle, but trust and accountability are at the heart of stewardship. Your father believed in transparency. That's why he commissioned this system. I smiled briefly, the motion tinged with both sadness and resolve. The camera may not lie, but it does remind us of our choices. Brielle lowered her gaze, tears brimming in her eyes as she whispered, We thought it would never come to this." Her voice cracked, laced with regret and disbelief. Tamsin's fingers curled around the arm of her chair, knuckles aching white against the carved wood. Neither sister spoke again. There was nothing left to say. Helena stepped forward, sliding the remote into her pocket with a practiced flick. "Mr. Clark, if you would care to outline the next steps." Her invitation hung in the room like a challenge. I nodded, retrieving my own folder, this one containing plans for transitional meetings and the conditional reentry program Edward had drafted for his heirs. Their path back lay open, but only if they accepted the terms. 2 years of documented stewardship, living wages only, and no shortcuts. I opened the folder, feeling the smooth heft of graphite sketches and prognostic spreadsheets. "Your father believed in a second chance," I said, voice steady, projecting compassion without weakness. "You may choose to work for this estate rather than against it. You can start tomorrow in the tasting room on the grounds, learning what true responsibility means." I let my gaze drift across their bowed heads, then raised my eyes to the assembled crowd. Accountability isn't about punishment, it's about preservation. The room exhaled collectively, the tension melting like frost in morning sun. Guests shifted, murmuring assent and respect for the fairness of the proposition. The sisters remained silent, their defeat sealed by their own recorded words. In that charged silence, I recognized the power of unseen witnesses and steadfast principles. The cameras had done more than preserve proof. They had delivered poetic justice, reminding everyone present that true authority belongs not to those who claim a name, but to those who earn it through quiet vigilance and unwavering integrity. I remember the morning sunlight spilling through the vineyard's east gate, gilding the dew-tipped vines like scattered gemstones, long before the sisters realized the empire they'd claimed with words had slipped through their fingers. Brielle and Tamsin tried everything after the will reading and the security footage revelation, spin control, half-hearted apologies, even attempts at public relations damage limitation, but they never once asked the question that mattered most. How did I deserve their father's trust more than they did? The truth, simple and unadorned, was that I was the only one who showed up. While Brielle was halfway around the world in Bali, broadcasting her latest self-care retreat to thousands of followers, I was in the early frost mornings inspecting frost blankets on the youngest shoots, ensuring no cold snap would steal the season's first grapes. While Tamsin was hosting glittering champagne book clubs beneath crystal chandeliers, I was in dimly lit cellars tasting barrel samples, negotiating with coopers over stave quality and toast levels. They built narratives of entitlement, of birthright and exclusivity, but they never built anything themselves. I watched them try to reclaim their status with staged photo ops, Brielle in a pale pink suit on the tasting room terrace, Tamsin holding a leather-bound ledger for the cameras, each pretending to be involved in running the estate. I saw the glossy shots blur in my peripheral vision while I huddled with winemakers to forecast yield forecasts and soil analysts to recalibrate pH balances. Photo captions boasted, "Reclaiming our legacy," but the comments dried up when fans realized there was no tangible progress, just rehearsed smiles and hollow promises. They claimed I'd tricked their father, exploited family ties, and inserted myself into corridors they believed impenetrable. Yet they never asked why Edward chose me. They never asked why he trusted my counsel over theirs. Perhaps because they sensed the answer would carry weight their satin robes and influencer invitations could never match. The answer lay in accountability, in rolling up my sleeves and reckoning with every broken fence post, every misfiled invoice, every delayed contract. I didn't dodge responsibility, I embraced it. I recall the colloquy after the family meeting when Brielle cornered me by the service entrance. Her voice trembled with indignation masked as faux calm. "You don't understand," she said, smoothing the hem of her designer jacket. "This estate was our birthright." I studied her, recalling the mornings she slept in, the afternoons she spent arranging flat-lit brunches for sponsored content, the nights she flew back to New York for VIP events. I thought of how she dismissed the cold stables, the leaking roof, the neglected guest cottages as behind the scenes, as if dereliction qualified as privacy rather than negligence. The irony struck me then. Entitlement had blinded her to every scrap of care the estate needed. She saw only the cherry blossom trees, never the cracked irrigation lines beneath their branches. She admired the antique chandeliers, never the faulty wiring that risked a spark. She adored the vineyard's postcard view, but never noticed the wilting shoots in the northwest corner. Her conclusions were always aesthetic. Mine were always pragmatic. Tamsin, in her own brand of willful ignorance, saw spreadsheets as threats rather than tools. She believed that tossing champagne flutes in the air conferred ownership, that sending curated invitations equated to stewardship. She refused to attend meetings with agronomists, balked at site visits to the workshops where barrel staves were milled, and balked at the notion of reading even a single budget line. The control, she claimed, was nothing more than a title she waved before the world, empty of substance. They wanted the house. They wanted the car. They wanted the vineyard and its yield. But they had no notion of what ownership meant. Ownership meant answering emails at dawn from the irrigation vendor, negotiating shipment schedules in the afternoon with distributors in London, attending an 8 p.m. call with a legal team drafting export documents. Ownership meant being on call for staff emergencies at midnight, handling broken-down tractors at dawn, and signing payroll checks in the quiet moments before sunrise. It meant seeing roots in the earth and knowing those roots needed nourishment. When Brielle asked me to hand back what was hers, I looked her in the eye and saw doubt flicker behind defiance. I thought of the mornings I spent wiring funds for frost cloths before she even left her silk sheets, Of the afternoons, I spent securing vineyard expansion loans while she posed in designer sunglasses. I offered no apology, only the clarity of truth. I didn't steal anything, I told her. I earned it. I never raised my voice. There was no need. Every contractor who pruned the vines, every worker who replaced the broken fence boards, every accountant who reconciled those balance sheets, all bore witness to a stewardship built on diligence, not inheritance. The estate didn't belong to Brielle and Tamsin because they'd been born Carradine. It belonged to the one who treated its daily needs as sacrosanct. I watched the light shift across the vineyard one late evening as I locked up the tasting room. The vines glowed in the golden hour, heavy with promise. The staff had already gone home. No influencers, no book club guests. Just me, the land, and the quiet hum of responsibility fulfilled. I traced the rows with my fingertips through the tractor window, thinking of the months ahead, bottling schedules, harvest tours, winter pruning. And I thought of Brielle and Tamsin, who might linger on the periphery, but would never truly belong here unless they learned what it meant to care. They never owned it anyway. Not truly. Because ownership isn't a matter of birthright or social media announcements. It's the willingness to shoulder every sunrise worry, every unexpected storm emergency, every incremental repair that adds up to a legacy that endures. The Carradine estate isn't mine because of legal filings or confiscated titles. It's mine because I dared to step into the shadowed barns, the mechanics' shops, the silent boardrooms, and tend to what no one else would. And in that caring, I claimed what they never could, legacy earned, not inherited. The day I first walked the length of the main driveway without a blade of grass out of place, I knew the Carradine estate had become a testament not to birthright, but to care. I'd arrived before sunrise, the gravel cool beneath my polished boots, determined to inspect the new automated sprinklers I'd installed weeks earlier. When I saw the arches of water arcing evenly across the lawn, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. This was what true ownership looked like, a willingness to wake before dawn to ensure nothing wilted. Later that morning, Brielle burst through the front doors in a swirl of chiffon and complaints, a publicist in tow, demanding a statement for her followers. She claimed I'd tricked her father, exploited his trust, and leveraged family ties for my own gain. She spoke with practiced indignation, voice pitched perfectly for dramatic effect. But as she rattled off talking points, I watched her designer flats tread across marble floors that had been newly polished at my insistence. Her words rang hollow against the sheen of a relentless attention to detail. "I don't understand why you do this to your own family," she said, as narrowing as she flicked a manicured hand in my direction. "Why turn them into employees?" I led her toward the vineyard terraces, where workers in safety boots and high-visibility vests pruned the vines. "Because someone has to," I replied. "When you were off in Bali chasing hashtags, I was the one here negotiating frost protection, training staff on new equipment, and balancing the estate's books. You never owned any of this because you never asked to learn how it worked." She huffed, arms folding across her chest. "I never asked because I thought it was ours." Tamsin appeared beside her, arms laden with a stack of legal papers and press releases, her expression a mask of wounded pride. "We want the house back," she said, voice brittle. "We want our inheritance." I paused at the edge of the tasting room patio, overlooking the rows of grapevines shimmering in midday sun. "You already have an inheritance," I said. "An opportunity, if you care to take it. But calling this place your own doesn't make it so." A gust of wind carried the faint hum of the cellar's air vents below us. I thought of the countless hours I'd spent down there, coordinating barrels, calibrating humidity levels, and monitoring fermentation temperatures. Each detail mattered. Too warm and the wine soured. Too cold and fermentation stalled. I had learned to read subtle changes in barrel staves like chapters in a book, interpreting the estate's needs before a problem surfaced. "I didn't steal anything," I continued, turning back to face them. "I earned it." I pointed to the gleaming new pumps beside the tasting room's terrace garden. "Remember when that fountain by the reflecting pool broke? Your plumber told you it was too expensive to fix." I made the call to fund the repair because the garden needed that water circulation. You celebrated your brunches next to it, never noticing it was broken. Brielle looked away, cheeks flushing. Tamsin's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, the only sound was the distant drone of a tractor mixing soil amendments in the orchard beyond. "Your father wanted someone who wouldn't just look pretty in photos," I said softly. He wanted someone who'd show up, who'd dig into the earth, who'd wrestle with budgets and inspections, who'd care more about the roof over the grape presses than the roof over a selfie. I was that person. They said nothing. The weight of unspoken truths settled between us. Brielle glanced at her phone, thumb hovering over her social feed as though begging the world to validate her grievance. But the silence held more power than any viral post. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "I'm not your enemy," I said. "I'm here to preserve what he built. If you want to join me, you can start by showing up. Real work, real hours. Otherwise, this place stays as it is." Tamsin swallowed. She straightened her shoulders, clearing her throat. "And if we refuse?" I let the question linger, then answered quietly, "Then you'll remain outsiders looking in, entitled to nothing more than memories." They exchanged a glance, the defiance draining from their features. I turned away, stepping down toward the vineyard, leaving them on the terrace with their silent verdict. As I walked among rows heavy with promise, I felt the soil beneath my boots, rich and alive. I knew what legacy meant: labor, attention, and unwavering presence. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that no amount of titled entitlement could replace the substance of genuine stewardship. Tamsin intercepted me in the foyer as I returned from the afternoon's vineyard inspection, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome of defiance. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes burned with purpose. "We need to talk, alone," she said, voice steady but low. The tension in her tone reminded me of the countless times she'd ordered staff around, demanding deference. Now she wanted something from me, and I was curious. I led her out through the front doors into the courtyard, the late light soft against the stone facades. A warm breeze stirred the hanging wisteria vines, and the scent of crushed lavender drifted from the beds I'd replanted myself last spring. I paused on the flagstones, crossing my arms. "What's on your mind?" I asked. Tamsin took a breath and stepped closer, raising one slender hand as though presenting a trophy. "Here's the deal," she said. She tapped the stack of papers she held. "Drafted agreements, press statements, language thick with legalese. Give us the house back. You can keep the vineyard, the winery, everything else. But the house, our childhood home, must be returned to us. We'll walk away peacefully." Her words were calm, but her determination was clear. She believed she was making a generous offer. I studied her face, noting the tight line of her jaw and the imperceptible tremor in her voice. She had rehearsed this, tailored it for impact. But she misjudged one critical detail. I didn't divide assets. I controlled them all. "The house," I repeated softly. "The one you filmed so many videos in? The one you considered your aesthetic backdrop?" I gestured upward to the balustrade balconies and the ornate cornices I'd repaired last winter. "That house is under my name, along with the winery, the farmland, the guest cottages, and the vineyard itself." She glanced sideways, surprised, perhaps for the first time in years. "But—" she began and stopped. I continued. "The car you drove in this morning?" I pointed across the courtyard to a sleek sedan parked beside the fountain. "The lease is under the estate. Technically mine too." Her eyes widened, reflecting the fading sunset. I let the silence stretch, allowing the truth to settle like mist across the grounds. "I don't intend to be cruel," I said finally, voice softening. "But I will not cede what I earned. Your father entrusted me for a reason." I touched the fountain's marble rim. I financed every repair here, the roof overhaul, the new wiring, the water filtration system, and the spa wing. I funded frost protection for the vines, negotiated export contracts, and secured labeling rights for global markets. None of this happened by accident. Tamsin swallowed, setting her papers aside on a small iron table near the fountain. "So, there's no negotiation?" Her words were almost a whisper. "There's no division of assets that ever existed," I said. "Everything you think belongs to you, you never actually owned. If you want a piece of this estate, you'll need to earn it, just like any employee." I watched as realization and resignation flickered across her face. An hour later, Brielle arrived flanked by her lawyer, her expression a mask of controlled indignation. They marched through the courtyard, papers rustling, words poised like weapons. The lawyer introduced himself in clipped tones, listing grievances and threats. I listened, hands in pockets, as they presented their case, clauses they misunderstood, rights they assumed, reputations they claimed were at stake. When they finished, I stepped forward, motioning toward the estate beyond. "I've reviewed your arguments," I said evenly. Your case hinges on assumptions of ownership that the trust documents explicitly counter. Contest the trust, and you forfeit everything. Stipends, honorary titles, even visitation rights. I paused, letting the gravity of their position sink in. If you're prepared to forfeit your claims entirely, by all means proceed. They exchanged glances, Brielle's defiance wavering, her lawyer's confidence faltering. The late afternoon glow caught on the fountain's cascading water, an unspoken reminder that power often flows from those who guide the source, not those who merely stand beside it. I turned away and walked back toward the main house, boots scuffing the stones beneath. Behind me, I heard the legal counsel clear his throat and Brielle speak in hushed tones, the words settlement and conditions floating through the air. But I knew the reality. This house, like every other part of the estate, belonged to me. They would learn, in time, that respect is earned in the fields and boardrooms, not demanded from drawing rooms. And as I ascended the steps, the sound of water and wind in the vineyard called me home, reminding me that true ownership is rooted in unwavering care, not in empty titles. That evening, the estate's antler chandelier cast a soft glow through the high-ceiling drawing room as I placed the USB drive on the oak coffee table. The leather-bound chairs circled us like silent jurors. Brielle and Tamsin sat across from me, their faces taut with reluctant curiosity. I offered them water. Crisp spring water in slender glasses, and watched the condensation bead before I pressed play on the discreet media player. The room fell into hushed anticipation. Edward appeared on the screen with the same dignified bearing he'd always upheld in life. His tailored charcoal suit and crisp white shirt reminded me of the man who'd taught me so much about stewardship. For a moment, his eyes glimmered with warmth, then hardened with purpose. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "My dear daughters," he began, voice resonant and calm. "I love you both more than words can express. Yet love alone is never enough when legacy teeters on neglect." His lips curved in a sad smile before he gestured toward the estate grounds behind him, green vines stretching into mist. I saw Brielle's hand tremble on her glass. Tamsin leaned forward, elbows on her knees, unblinking. Neither spoke as Edward narrated his disappointments. The broken shutters he'd discovered on a cold winter morning, the unpaid invoices piling behind the library's secret panel, the gossiping guests who'd marveled at candlelit dinners even as the heating system malfunctioned. He recounted each incident with calm indignation, naming dates, places, and expenditures that only meticulous record-keeping could have preserved. His gaze flicked downward, and for a brief moment I recognized the vulnerability behind his normally unflappable demeanor. "I entrusted you with this estate by virtue of blood," he continued. "But blood cannot substitute for dedication. You squandered time and resources on vanity and spectacle while this land languished under your neglect." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle like dust motes in the golden lamplight. On screen, Edward's tone shifted from reproach to resolve. "Several years ago," he said, "I transferred ownership into a trust managed by the one person whose actions consistently demonstrated care over pomp." His eyes brightened with quiet pride as he turned slightly toward the vines visible through the window behind him. Sebastian Clark never asked for accolades. He learned every ledger line, inspected every slat of wood, and listened to the whispered needs of this land. The camera cut to footage of me reviewing soil reports at dawn, sleeves rolled up and boots dusted with earth, then to late-night meetings with agronomists over flickering laptop screens. Edward's narration overlapped. He sowed more than seeds. He sowed trust. I felt a lump in my throat as he spoke. For years, I'd hidden this footage, respecting the confidentiality of his final testament. Now, his words reaffirmed the plan we'd set in motion. Edward folded his hands and addressed his daughters directly. "I do not wish this to be a punishment but a lesson," he said, voice steady. "You have the opportunity to reclaim your heritage through service, humility, and respect for what truly sustains this estate." He outlined a conditional pathway, 2 years of documented contributions from pruning to payroll oversight, with monthly audits and mentorship under the estate managers. "Prove yourselves worthy," he challenged, "and you will earn back partial ownership. Fail, and you will forfeit all claims permanently." I watched Brielle swallow hard, her eyes glossy. Tamsin's expression flickered between defiance and remorse. Their mouths remained closed, as though Edward's carefully curated words had stolen their breath. On the screen, Edward leaned forward, a final admonition in his gaze. My daughters, I love you. But this estate needs more than your lineage. It needs your labor and your care. The choice now lies in your hands." Then he offered a tender smile before fading into the final frame of black background and soft orchestral chords. The room was silent except for the gentle hum of the projector. I reached forward and clicked stop. The screen blinked out, and the chandelier's glow felt warmer, more intimate. I set the USB aside and rose, smoothing my jacket. "He wanted you to see that," I said quietly. "He wanted you to hear it from him." Brielle laid her glass down with a single, deliberate click and looked at her sister. "We didn't realize," she whispered, voice brimming with vulnerability. Tamsin's shoulders sagged as she nodded. "I thought our name was enough," she admitted. I offered them both a steady look, empathy tempered by resolve. "Your father believed in second chances," I reminded them. "He believed you could change, but only if you chose to." I paused, letting the flicker of hope settle between us. "The path is there. It always was." They rose together, eyes meeting mine with a new understanding forged in the glow of their father's words. We stood in that hushed drawing room for individuals connected by blood, by legacy, and now by the promise of redemption. As I guided them toward the door, I sensed a shift. The sisters who once wielded entitlement like weapons had come to face the man behind the ledger and their father's final decree. And in that moment, the estate felt reinvigorated, alive with potential once more. The next morning, just before dawn, I unlocked the tasting room's heavy doors and flipped on the lights, watching burned-out bulbs flicker to life against rows of crystal glasses. I'd stayed up late finalizing the conditional reentry program, frosting the details like a pastry's ornate icing. 2 years of documented work, monthly performance reviews, zero shortcuts, no influencers perched on bar stools. When Brielle and Tamsin arrived, fashionably late, of course, they stepped onto the slate floor in high heels and designer sunglasses, scanning the room for a photographer's angle rather than a job description. I greeted them with a nod and handed each a simple name badge clipped to a thin lanyard. Brielle Carradine, trainee, and Tamsin Carradine, trainee. Their expressions flickered between indignation and disbelief, as though the lanyards weighed more than gold chains. I led them behind the bar, where polished countertops awaited their first task, cleaning glasses. The sisters exchanged glances as I handed each a soft towel and pointed to a stack of stemware. "You'll start here," I said, voice steady. "Perform this task diligently. Every glass must sparkle without streaks. Then proceed to stocking the shelves, rotating inventory by date. Document each batch in the logbook." Tamsin's lip curled, Brielle's jaw tightened. Neither spoke. Instead, they knelt by the sink, delicate fingers twitching as if uncertain how to handle ordinary tasks. Within minutes, their sleeves were damp and their hands pruned, their designer nails scraped raw by glass edges. They glanced up, mortified by the absence of applause or cameras. Later, I walked them to the vineyard terraces, the morning sun casting long shadows across neat rows. "You'll learn each vine's varietal and soil needs," I explained, handing them pruning shears and notebooks. "Make 10 identifications from memory, note any signs of disease, and report to the agronomist by noon." I watched them kneel in the dirt, their heels replaced by borrowed work boots chunky with tread. Their white jeans stained with dark soil. They hesitated at every cut before slicing a tendril. I didn't offer guidance. They needed to learn through careful observation and correction. By midday, Brielle's hands bore calluses and Tamsin's notes looked less like social media drafts and more like technical annotations. At lunch, the staff gathered in the break room, murmuring curiosity as the Carradine sisters sat at a modest table alongside interns and seasonal workers. They ate simple sandwiches and water, no catered spreads or branded juice bottles. A few regular employees recognized them, whispered apologies in passing, but most simply nodded before returning to their meals. Brielle stared at her plate as though tasting dirt, and Tamsin looked around as if expecting a rescue. I joined them briefly, offering pointers on vineyard mapping and demonstrating a leaf inspection technique. Their eyes widened at the precision required, a far cry from staged content creasing their social feeds. The afternoon brought a shift to administrative duties in the estate office. I assigned them each a workstation, Brielle to invoice reconciliation, Tamsin to contract reviews. They sat at desks where interns once filed papers, blinking at spreadsheets bursting with numbers. Brielle asked timidly how to input expense codes. Tamsin struggled with legal terminology that demanded exact phrasing. I resisted the urge to intervene immediately, allowing them to grapple with flawed entries until they asked for clarification. They learned that misfiling a single expense could trigger audit flags or delayed vendor payments. Consequences invisible on camera, but critical in practice. By the end of the first day, dusk settled across the vineyard, painting rose in lavender light. The sisters met me at the courtyard fountain, faces flushed and eyes heavy with newfound respect for unglamorous labor. Their clothes stuck to their skin in random patches, and their hair bore errant strands matted by sweat and wind. Tamsin spoke first, voice low and earnest. "I didn't realize how much goes on behind the scenes," she admitted, wiping grit from her palms. Brielle nodded beside her, tears glinting in the fountain spray. "It's harder than it looks," she whispered. I handed them fresh water and offered a small, approving smile. "Tomorrow, you'll join the cellar team," I said. "Temperature control, barrel rotation, yeast sampling. Continue logging your observations and submit end-of-day reports." Their shoulders straightened, an unspoken acceptance of the path their father and I had laid. As I walked away, I felt the gravel crunch under my boots and glanced back at the two women who once dismissed stewardship as beneath them. Now they stood rooted in the courtyard, transformed by the very conditions they once scoffed at, conditions designed not to humiliate, but to educate, to forge respect through honest work rather than inherited entitlement. A year has passed since I revealed the fine print and set the sisters on their path of probationary stewardship, yet every sunrise still feels like a renewal. I slip into my worn denim jacket long before dawn, coffee thermos in hand, and step onto the dew-fresh gravel path that winds through the vineyard's eastern row. The vines stand tall and heavy with grapes, clusters swelling beneath tender leaves, their deep purple hue promising another exceptional harvest. I breathe in the crisp morning air, scented faintly with fermenting fruit and cool earth, and feel the quiet satisfaction that comes from watching what you've nurtured flourish. The sisters arrived early today, too, a change from their former habit of rolling in at midday in designer sunglasses and creased outfits. Now, they greet me with shy nods and practical boots, sleeves rolled up to expose forearms brushed with soil. They pause to help hoist the misting system back into place, spray nozzles glinting in the growing light. I supervise from a short distance, observing how their movements mirror those of the vineyard crew, deliberate, efficient, respectful of each vine's needs. In their faces, I detect humility tempered with pride, a growing understanding that legacy is built through consistent care rather than inherited title. We walk in companionable silence past the tasting room's terrace, where fresh oak barrels stand stacked for maintenance. The hum of cooperative labor drifts faintly from the barrel house behind us. This morning, I've scheduled a meeting with the head viticulturist to review soil sample data and forecast irrigation requirements for the coming week. At my signal, the sisters follow me into the tiled courtyard, notebooks in hand. Lynn, our agronomist, greets us with a nod and spreads open detailed charts on a folding table. The three of us study pH levels, nitrogen readings, and moisture percentages. Brielle asks pointed, precise questions about nutrient balancing. Tamsin cross-references yield predictions with weather patterns on her tablet. Their engagement is no longer performative. They have developed a genuine curiosity for the land they once regarded as a backdrop. After finalizing the irrigation adjustments, we head toward the cooperage where barrels lie in wait for care. The air inside smells of oak and yeast. I demonstrate the gentle tapping method to check stave integrity. A soft, hollow sound signifies ready barrels, while a dull thud indicates pressure issues. Brielle takes the hammer next, striking each barrel in turn. Her brow furrows in concentration before a smile breaks as she hears the clear ring of a perfect stave. Tamsin records the results meticulously, noting which barrels require heading repairs and which need char adjustments. I catch their eyes and see the respect they've earned for a craft that once seemed beneath them. By mid-morning, the courtyard fills with staff, pruners returning from the terraces, coopers wheeling wagons of staves, and cellar workers loading barrels onto forklifts. They pause to greet me, and I introduce them to Brielle and Tamsin as colleagues rather than spectacle. The crew's nods of recognition are genuine. Here, every person understands that stewardship involves teamwork and trust. When a young assistant approaches me with a question about temperature control in the cold room, I answer and then invite Brielle to share her recent findings on humidity regulation. She steps forward confidently, explaining the adjustments she implemented last week after noticing subtle condensation patterns. The assistant nods appreciatively, clearly valuing her input. Lunchtime arrives, and rather than a catered buffet, we gather around a simple picnic table under an old oak tree planted by Edward himself. Brielle lays out hearty sandwiches and fruit from the orchard. Tamsin pours iced herb tea brewed from mint and rosemary grown on the property. We eat slowly, savoring the flavors and the warm breeze. Conversation drifts from crop forecasts to harvest festivities and employee recognition plans. Their ideas are thoughtful and grounded, rooted in the understanding that the vineyard thrives when every contributor feels valued. I share anecdotes of Edward's favorite cluster tasting traditions, and they listen intently, envisioning ways to honor his memory while carving their own roles. The afternoon brings a final task: guest tour rehearsals and preparation for next week's Harvest Festival. Brielle will lead the first group through the vines, narrating the estate's history and winemaking process. Tamsin will guide them through the cellar, explaining barrel aging and bottle labeling. I watch as they practice their presentations in front of a small audience of interns. Brielle's voice is measured and warm, her storytelling enriched by details only gained through hands-on experience. Tamsin answers technical questions about fermentation to the satisfaction of her peers, her confidence evident. I nod in approval, knowing they've transformed entitlement into expertise. As dusk approaches, I return alone to the eastern gate. The sky burns in streaks of amber and rose, and the vines stand in bold silhouette. Somewhere beyond the rose, the hum of late-day machinery fades into a soft chorus of insects. I press my palm against the gate's wrought iron, feeling its cool strength beneath my fingertips. This land responds to care, not claim, to vigilance, not lineage. I close my eyes and remember Edward's words: ownership is stewardship made visible. The dawn hours have given way to twilight, and throughout the estate, lights glow warmly in the tasting room, the cooperage, and the farmhouse. Shadows dance across the courtyard where the sisters and staff embrace the land as their shared responsibility. I stride homeward across the gravel path, coffee thermos long empty but heart full. Behind me, the vineyard rests under a blanket of contentment born of dedication. Tomorrow, and every day after, this land will yield its fruit to those who tend it with unwavering respect. The vineyard belongs to me because I treat it as more than property. Because I love it, protect it, and honor its legacy in every measured step. And now, so do the Carradine sisters.